people who used to not know
Okay.
the difference. They thought Elaine was one person and Janelle was one person. I've seen people literally in Philly be like, "That's the same person." Yeah.
Right.
So, hello everyone, and welcome to Renew Talk. This is Elaine Janelle on the mic, and we are here with two of my special guests for this evening. And their names are Mr. Marvin James and Mr. Joe Carroll. We're here to talk about a specific topic that I find will be very interesting to many people because it's a word that has become a phenomenon in our community as well as other people's community. In fact, we are at a place now where there is a show on TV called The Neighbors, specifically based on gentrification. If you haven't seen it, it comes on Monday nights and it has Cedric the Entertainer in it as well as Tashina Arnold, and a few other people. I believe the young lady from Broke Girls is on it. And it is just a show specifically about two neighbors getting along because a white neighbor moves into a black community. And it's supposed to be a small sample of gentrification and whites and blacks getting along and showing their differences and their similarities. So that's a little bit of a piece of what we may talk about tonight. I like to let our conversations flow and go into different areas. So thank you to anybody who is joining us on tonight. And I am live on YouTube and on Instagram. So if you can't see everybody on Instagram, everybody will be showing on YouTube's link. I believe my name is Miss Mickey Jane on YouTube. Just click on that and we should be live under Miss Mickey Jane. All right, let me introduce my beautiful guests, handsome, because they're both men, praise the Lord. Guest on this evening, we have Mr. Marvin James and Mr. Joe Carroll. I guess I should go alphabetical order. Who wants to introduce themselves first?
Since you said alphabetical order, I don't know it by first name or last name, but I'm Joe
Oh,
Carroll.
my last name, because your last name will be first.
I'm Joe Carroll. I've lived in the District of Columbia for 12 years. I've worked in real estate that entire time for large firms as well as now for myself. I have worked on projects in predominantly African American neighborhoods, as well as predominantly non-African American neighborhoods, as well as up and down the economic spectrum. And I've done that for the full 12 years I've been here. And I live in what could be considered a gentrified neighborhood, Greater Columbia Heights. And I've lived there for 11 years. That's basically sort of the perspective. Those three perspectives are what I bring to the table.
Awesome. And you, Mr. James?
Thank you so much for inviting me, Elaine. Of course, my name is Marvin James. I am a advocate, campaign professional. I am stationed now currently in the city of Atlanta, Georgia, here working on the Stacey Abrams campaign. I've been working now for about 12 years, developing, pushing candidates into power structures to be able to speak for underserved communities here in the city of now Atlanta, but specifically within the state of Maryland and the city of Baltimore. This is a serious topic that deserves much discussion and really does speak to larger issues than presently talked about at surface. So I'm excited to be able to discuss and have a conversation about this.
Okay. I am glad that both of you can be a part tonight. I'm also glad because both of you I know have busy schedules, so I respect that. With that being said, I also wanted to ask the way I film out the actual full episode that is on SoundCloud. I am going to explain the actual definition of what gentrification is. Basically founded by a young lady out of London. But can you two give me your definitions, whether it's by the book or what you have accumulated through your time of serving the community and learning people and learning the community overall? Marvin can go first since Joe went first last time. I'll take that.
So the reality of it is that, of course, by definition, gentrification in itself is talking about an infusion of quote unquote middle class values or middle class people into a either underserved or uninhabited area for level growth, right? However, though, the modern connotation of what has taken place under the term or definition of gentrification is really the antithesis of what has become associated with the antithesis of white flight, right? So for myself personally, it is my belief, right, that gentrification in its modern context is really about the overdevelopment and infusion of displaced values of culture in present culture. And so that's really what gentrification means to me in its modern context.
Mm-hmm. Joe, would you share?
Yeah. Obviously, like I said, since I'm coming from the private sector, I think gentrification has sort of two I guess, lanes. One would be densification, which is, many of our cities became depopulated as a result of white flight, and it's the repopulation of those areas, which I think, as Mr. James points out, brings with it certain values and cultural changes. But in many instances, it's just a return of the same density that we were at pre-1960s. In some instances, as he points out, it's over densification, meaning that it's upzoned tremendously, such that the density surpasses pre-1960s levels. Then I think the second one is more, like I said, on the cultural plane. I think the term itself, the gentrification part, comes from, I think, Latin, genus or something, meaning the repeopling. So that is to say that there weren't people there before, which I myself take offense to. So that the whole idea of the return of people is, I think, is a little offensive within itself. And I think it has taken on a life of its own, as Mr. James points out, to become a very negative thing. I don't think it necessarily has to be negative, but governments and institutions and stuff have to take care to make sure it's not negative.
Okay, give me one moment. I realized that I'm near the window and there is a beautiful helicopter going by. And I live in a high floor in my building. All right. So getting back to the conversation at hand, I remember, Joe, you sharing me densification before. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why I did want you to share that on the show, because I know it's not a commonly thing heard within the community in general. Mm-hmm. But since we're specifically talking about gentrification and the fact that it came about, I feel like this is what I personally feel like, and this is why I'm doing this topic. I personally feel like gentrification has always been around. We just put a name to it, or somebody put a name to it. Mm-hmm. But I believe that it's always been around. And the reason I said that, in talking with my parents, I'm born and raised in West Philadelphia. And when they were born and raised in West Philadelphia and Southwest Philadelphia, their communities were majority Caucasian. There were some Black people in their communities, but quite a bit of their communities had a lot of Jewish people in the communities. Mm-hmm. They owned a lot of the businesses on the strip of 52nd Street in the community. Now 52nd Street has become majority African American, but now we're gaining Caucasian neighbors. Mm-hmm. And so the circle has now come around again, but the terminology was not really known until maybe the 60s, as you mentioned. My question to you, and Joe, please tell me where you're from, because I know you've been in DC the last 12 years. Where are you from again?
Yeah, I'm from Jacksonville, Florida originally.
Okay, so let me ask you both this question. Being from Jacksonville, Florida, and being from Baltimore, Maryland, what were your communities like in growing up? Just share a little bit of your personal, not too much, but what you feel comfortable sharing with the public.
So I'll start. I grew up in a majority African American neighborhood. Both my grandparents are based in Jacksonville, and both sets of grandparents and my parents My grandparents lived more in the inner city, and we lived more in the suburbs, but both of the communities were majority African American. As far as schooling, up until elementary and junior high, I went to majority, early junior high, I went to majority African American. And then we went to a magnet school system due to a desegregation plan. And there I went to probably like a 60% majority and 40% African American school. I bring up schools because I think that's an undercurrent of the gentrification conversation as well. And I think both contexts are relevant in this conversation.
And Marvin, do share where you grew up in Baltimore and how your community is then.
So, of course, growing up in the city of Baltimore, it is a predominantly African American city. And one of the blessings, of course, of being in the community that I grew up in is that, of course, it was a middle-class community filled with middle-class professionals, persons that were teachers, trash collectors. You might have one person who was a lawyer or a doctor who decided to kind of stay in that community for whatever reason they chose to be connected to that community. And because of that, right, there was always this ethos inside of that community that allowed cultural values and things that were important to either African Americans or even other diverse persons that were inside of the community. Right? That be the local restaurant that catered to African American tastes, right? We really had the best of both worlds, right? Of course, had everything that any other urban sprawl community would have, whether that be, crime, low income residents. However, though, we also had this kind of homogenous part of us as well, that we were literally thriving to try to do better and more and have involved persons to kind of create a better community. So I really kind of got the best of both worlds.
Right. And both of you sharing, I feel like we all come from a very stable background. Parents who are, if they did not go to college, whatever, it didn't even matter. They were stable people who had a job, as a whole. Something's clicking. I don't know what's clicking, but just to be honest. So who raised their family in a stable area. Did you feel like there was a need for a change when you were growing up? And so I'm directing this from personal to more political. Just go with me for a few minutes.
That's Marvin. You want to go first, or?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that, of course, of course, that question is very broad.
So take it as
I'll take it as it is, though. I don't think that you can ask that question to any human being or person, and they would say that my community is absolutely at its best. And that's regardless of whether we lived in, quote unquote, where I'm presently from, whether I'm in College Park or whether I'm in Buckhead. There are always things that people want to do better in their community. So to directly answer your question, I believe that, of course, there are different dynamics that absolutely would have made better community across the board for those from where I'm from, in the city of Baltimore. However, though, what I will say is that, of course, as a child and then coming into my adulthood, that there was never a time where I felt as though that my community or anything that I was a part of needed to drastically change. I do believe that, of course, there were things that needed to happen from a governmental standpoint, right? That would be better for my community. But as far as the person or the people that were on my block, I wouldn't probably have changed it for the world, because those people, those who were there, they absolutely kind of created the sense of community. Me and those who were on that particular block.
You can answer now, Joe. And I know the question is very important. So, but I just
it's okay. It's okay. This is interesting because I think my answer will kind of dovetail into why I think I came into doing the business that I do now. As I grew older in those communities, there started to be a tremendous amount of stress on retail. So I remember being younger and the grocery store was right around the corner, and we had clothing stores and things of that nature. And as I got older, those shops started to close. I still don't understand to this day. I mean, obviously I have to think with my child mind, not my adult mind, of why those things closed. But all of a sudden we were in a food desert. All of a sudden we didn't have clothing stores. All of a sudden, and it was jarring, right? As an individual. And I also remember a couple of developments that were supposed to come to our neighborhood that later didn't get financing or whatever. And, like I said, those stores, those grocery stores, according to what community it is for us, I think it was Winn-Dixie, closed and it never reopened. And, in other neighborhoods, it's Safeway or Giant or whomever closed and never reopened. And I don't know. I mean, I can theorize. I just don't want to theorize because people could, track and say, oh, no, that store didn't close for that reason. I can theorize why it closed. But that left those communities very challenged, where now people had to commute long distances to interact with the community like they once did. And even like the types of restaurants, I think sit-down restaurants began to disappear. They began to be replaced by fast food restaurants. Clothing stores started being replaced by dollar stores. And all of this changed over time. And like I said, that was the change I saw probably from about 8 or 9 to about 18 when I left Jacksonville. And I kind of still see the remnants of that.
It's on my what time period was that?
So that would be the 80s versus the 90s, right? Okay. The mid 80s versus the early to mid 90s. Would be the time that this kind of all occurred.
Okay. And so in that question being so broad, the reason why I asked it is because I think people tend to think that we need help. Mm-hmm. Save the urban community. And I'm one of those people who actually does not like the word urban because I think urban is automatically put towards a black set of people. So if somebody says you're real urban, I'm just like, are you? I'm not sure if I'm going to say that or what are you trying to say? So I don't actually even like that word. I would say I'm from the city, and I prefer just to say I'm from the city. I mean, y'all can share that connotation. That's just a personal but with that being said, I think a lot of people thought they would need it. So on the show, I wanted to share and show that it was more the dynamic of we enjoy the community that we live in. Those are the things that needed to be changed. We all could say we enjoy the community we live in, and that what was there and brought to the people. Mm-hmm. My question is in seeing the gentrification in your communities or seeing it happen in other cities, do you see it necessarily as a hurtful event, or do you see that there could be a balance if worked at it? And so the reason I ask this question is because I feel like I am, in a weird way, a part of the gentrification in DC. I'm not from DC. I came here for work. There's a lot of people's stories with DC. DC is the transit city. I hear it all the time that a lot of people come here for a period of time and they leave, they go somewhere else, or they go back home. And so my question then to you is, from seeing it in their point, do we think it's hurtful? Do you think it's helpful? Or is there a medium that we could possibly meet at? And how would we do that? Do explain.
I'll tell you what I don't like. I don't like the sort of erasing of culture that we're seeing in many communities. And I think that's difficult to put one's hand on, but we know it when we see it, as some of the Supreme Court justices say. Just so that turning over of retail and cultural institutions that feel like they have to move as a result of gentrification. So churches leaving the inner city, urban, whatever you want to call it, restaurants, businesses leaving for suburban locations. Now, there are a lot of economic reasons about that, but I just wanted to point out just the cultural point. And then the other is particularly, it was actually good that you said about the years. So if you think of my parents or my grandparents, now they are 60, 70, 80, 90. They're in these communities and they're being displaced because of gentrification. So that's the other downside. I personally am a little bit more liberal on the agency of people that are, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, and sort of they make certain economic decisions. Like if I decide to sell my house, I may just decide to sell my house and move to Prince George's or whatever I want to do. But I don't want it to be where when you're dealing with someone over 55, 60, 65, near retirement age or over, oftentimes they're forced out. So it's sort of a balance, because if you look at just the statistics, you'll say, oh, this many people sold their house. But some of those people were looking to sell their house for whatever reason, right? But some of those people were forced out, and teasing out between the two, I think is important. So I think the cultural and just the wholesale displacement of some of our mothers and fathers, and I mean in that broader sense, like our older generation, I think is extremely troubling for me.
Marvin?
So first, I think that there is an academic conversation about gentrification that has been happening probably for about the last 30 or 40 years, because there has been this, as I said at the beginning, this return of quote unquote suburbanites back to urban sprawled cities. So, of course, we're seeing it everywhere, whether it is in St. Louis, whether it is in Atlanta, whether it is in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, San Francisco, Houston, Dallas. We're seeing where persons are willing and wanting to be close to their corporate centers. They want to be close to public transportation. They want to be close to airports. And of course, for the majority of all of those things that I just mentioned, they are centered around quote unquote, in urban areas, downtown based city areas. With that being said, I think that one of the main topics that is often, for whatever reason, especially when it is discussed in the halls of academia about gentrification, is the lack of, or really just this whole narrative of economic exclusion within underserved communities. And the reason that gentrification is really even a thing is because there really is a lack of real fundamental economic planning for poor and underserved communities. So just keeping it very much 100, right? Poor people are, of course, extremely immersed or pulled into poverty. Of course, there's so many articles, but the Wall Street Journal did an article that in order for a family to climb out of poverty, they would have to go 20 years. This is very important. 20 years without it coming into contact with any type of emergency. So that could be your grandmother dying, that could be level finances hitting any one of your immediate family members, right? Cousin JoJo can't go to jail so that you gotta bail them out, right? There really is this long step and steep to you getting out of poverty. And so what ends up happening is that these communities are structured into a place of where they literally have been put in a place, whether it's by systemic oppression. Baltimore is famous, as well as Philadelphia, as well as New York City, of this thing called redlining, right? Which was that the majority of these cities and the way that they were placed and the way that they were drawn was so that the majority of African Americans would be put into one section of the city. There are houses in the city of Baltimore right now in sections of Park Heights. The Baltimore Sun did an article about how they had rehabbed a slew of houses across a brand new elementary school. And they rehab these entire houses. And the reason that that's very important and the reason that that's very interesting is that government is normally not in the business of rehabbing houses. They might provide money to developers or they might provide money to citizens to do the rehabbing. However, they themselves are not in the business of rehabbing. They did all of that. They provided money. They rehabbed the houses. And they are unable to sell these houses. These houses are well below market value. However, though, they have all of the great things that you see in gentrified areas, right? Stainless steel appliances, hardwood floors, updated, wiring, all of these things. And however, they're unable to sell those houses. And once again, like I said, it's across from a brand new elementary school. These are the type of things that quote unquote, right, would absolutely sell. And Joe is in the business of, real estate. If you take any, incoming quote unquote family and you show them this is stuff that they would love to have. However, though, because there are larger structural things that are in power that often creates these microcosms or bubbles. Issues are not talked about at a certain level, and it keeps persons who are in those neighborhoods structured literally in poverty until there are persons who have made up their mind, whether that be government, whether that be developers, whether that be a group of people, that this community is going to quote unquote now be better.
Yes.
So I think that of course, I took this long highway to get to your answer to tell you.
It's good.
It's so much larger than just about whether or not it's good or bad for a community, right? I don't think anybody will tell you that gentrification in its correct context is bad, right? People want great homes. They want great property values. They want great schools. No one's going to tell you that it's bad. However, though, that the moment that we displace our cultural values, which are often associated with minority neighborhoods before it is quote unquote gentrified, it is why there's so visceral attitude towards gentrification.
Right. And before you start, that's exactly why I brought up the question, because I was like, I can't side with Hurtful. I can't side with Faithful. Who wants to live in a trash house? You can live in a trash house. Who wants to live in a house that looks like it was built in the 60s and still acts in the 60s versus living in a house that was remodeled in 2000 or 2010? Like, come on, let's just be real about the situation. But I think naturally, as soon as those who are in the African or even Hispanic community, when we got the concept of gentrification, I've heard people become very hateful towards it without having a clear understanding of what's even happening. They just
that's because it just happens. So I live in East Baltimore, and I'm proud to be and live in East Baltimore. I live downtown now. However, though, I was at a fundraiser for one of my friends who was running for delegate in Maryland General Assembly. We were on Jefferson Street. Jefferson has absolutely predominantly has always been African American, low underserved community. It is about 5 or 7 blocks from Johns Hopkins University. Of course, there is a whole conversation and dialogue about Johns Hopkins University that I won't even remotely get into this because that can be a whole 5, renewed talk broadcast. Right. However, though, I'll never forget, all of us, we sitting outside, we're talking, that we're enjoying ourselves, we're being loud, boisterous, as we always are. And something happens. And when this happens, and when I tell you what's about to happen, shifts not only our entire thinking, we just all become flabbergasted because we don't know what just happened. And what just happened is that a white woman was walking her dog on Jefferson Street at about 7:30 at night, and it's dark. And we're all paranoid because in all of the years that we lived on Jefferson Street, we have never seen a white woman especially after the hours of 5 p.m. And she surely wasn't walking her white dog. We're all flabbergasted. And we're sitting there trying to figure out what is going on. And we're not trying to figure out what's going on because we clearly are oblivious to the fact that white people live in the city of Baltimore. It is the fact that in all of our years of living in East Baltimore, and mind you, we're talking about Lakewood and Monument, we're talking about in the heart. These are, this is where literally if you pulled up crime statistics, probably in the last 2 or 3 months, 5 to 15 people have been shot, right? This is the heart of East Baltimore. To see a white woman walking her dog was breathtaking. What's going on? But it caused us to go into reflection about everything that's happening on the outside, which is literally 3 blocks down the road. Right? There are homes that are being absolutely rehabbed and are selling for about $300,000 to $400,000. Right. This is at the heart of where that visceral attack comes for gentrification. It is not towards the persons that are doing gentrification. It is literally the fact that there were renters that have been in those homes for about 10, 15, 20 years, as sad as that is. And they were never probably given the economic plan or economic option, right? Possibly own that home.
Right. Yep. So I would agree with him. I think the interesting thing is the question is, does gentrification happen to or happen for our communities? Right.
That's it. Go ahead.
And understanding, getting into the politics of it and getting into the institutional part of it, because he mentioned Johns Hopkins. He mentioned, I mentioned churches earlier. All of these institutions play a role in knowing what's coming and making sure that people are informed, because part of it is people are just not informed. It hits them like a wave, right? There's been community meetings in this community for years. I never go to them, whoever the person is, person X in this community. And then before they know it, here comes the wave, and they have not been a part of the process. And so the happening to versus the happening for is a big question. And how do we, as people, like I said, even me as I strive to be a more conscientious developer, sometimes I feel like I don't have the tools to do what I would normally want to do. Because once again, gentrification is happening to and not for our communities. And similarly, I live off of Georgia Avenue, as you may be aware, in DC. And yes. So I remember the first time I saw white people at the Banneker Pool, which is across from Howard. I was the same thing. I was just done. That changed my entire day, my entire outlook. That, you know, given, as we know, it's a whole big long history about city pools with Black and white people, right? And the idea that they would be going to Banneker Pool was just like, you know, that. So I had the same sort of jarring experience that Marvin did about that, you know, and seeing the community continue to change beyond that. And once again, this is not an attack on non-African Americans or whatever, but it just happens, and you're like, what is going on here? And does everybody in this community know what's going on here, and are they prepared for it, and what can we do to help them? So I agree with Mr. James on that. Marvin. Yeah.
I transitioning to my next question, because you started transitioning a little bit, Joe, was two things, because I think it happens a little bit in the Hispanic community, but you don't see it as often. It's not as, I'm not seeing it as much in the forefront, because it's the same concept in Philadelphia I can speak of, because I don't know as much about DC to speak on it, but in Philadelphia they have their specific sets where you know when you hit a certain corner, you in his sit, be apart or go your way. Like, choose how you want to do this. And so with choose how you want to make it happen. But with all of these changes happening, I think my main concern, and one of my reasons why I was pushed to do this episode, no matter what people say, because I did a little poll earlier, probably about 2 months ago. I did a little poll on Instagram how you could choose yes or no. And a few people was like, oh, I don't want to hear about gentrification. I was like, I don't care what people feel like. I'm putting this up here because people need to be informed. And so my next question more so is, how can we help the community? And the reason I'm saying this is because I straight told my parents. I'm the only child of old. My parents were already older when they bore me. My dad was 41 on the day I was born. That was his birthday. So naturally, I was born with older parents. I said to them when I was like 12, 15, I was like, so y'all do know this house is mine. If y'all want to make all these changes, update me, because I'm telling you now, and that was like 17, 18 years ago, this house is mine. And then when my grandfather passed down the street, I told my dad, I said, so what are you planning to do with the house? My mother was like, I think he wants to sell it. I said, can we have a home meeting?
Can we have conversation?
This is before we got any Caucasian neighbors.
Right.
Just something that was endearing to me, because I realized a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people in the African American community, because of being uneducated, become money hungry. And then as soon as somebody gives them any type of deal, it could be a deal where their property is worth way more, but because they would give it some form of a deal and go ahead and take that money, or they sell their house because they're like, I don't want to have anything to do with this. I understand that owning property is worth. I'm not taking that away from it. I'm not taking that away from it at all. But I think that it's more so having the knowledge to own the property and to know how to maintain it. Because that is something I had told my parents, and even my grandmother's house in North Carolina. I've found their people. I said, who is over the city? I need to know what's going on. And Kinston's a small town. What are y'all doing that's changing the culture of Kinston in the next 10 to 20 years? Because I want my grandmother's house that was built by my great-grandfather to still be here. I don't want nobody buying it. We'll remodel it. Give us a few years. So I just want to hear the kind of the take of what you feel like needs to happen in our communities, where we are, where we have lived, what can shift that thinking going forward, or help us simply going forward. Joe, Marvin, y'all can choose.
Let me say this, like, across the board, the reason that, of course, and this alludes back to my earlier comment, which is that the reason that gentrification happens at the rate that it happens is, of course, number one, Black people don't own their homes, right? We naturally don't own our homes. And I want to be abundantly clear about why we don't own our homes. Because oftentimes we are given this broad stroke that number one, Black people don't want to own the homes that they're either renting or that they don't want to have home ownership, which is fundamentally not true.
Right.
While, of course, as millennials, that thinking has transitioned to where a lot of millennials in themselves, they don't want to own homes, they want to rent, and they want to be given the option to be able to leave, go, be wherever they are, whether it be for work, family, whatever your reasoning is for renting, right? That there are systematically a lot of reasons why Black people don't own. In the city of Baltimore, Wells Fargo had to literally settle $100 million suit, over $100 million suit, because it was not a discrimination lawsuit, because they were discriminating against African American and Latino minorities against actually providing them with home ownership opportunities, right? This is not, Black people are not sitting at home wanting to pay rent for the rest of their life. Our grandmothers, our grandfathers have told us, because one of the things that they felt as though was the one thing that nobody could take away from us are our homes. And my grandmother, my grandfather, my father, my mother, they talked to us about home ownership. The difference was that there were so many outside dynamics that they either weren't aware of, could have the foresight of, to understand, right, that home ownership will become home ownership, and the process of it is a major barrier. So Black people absolutely want to own their homes. Gentrification is happening at that rate because we do not own our homes. I can assure you that if more Black people own their homes in the urban areas of where gentrification is happening, gentrification would not be happening. It just would not be happening at the rate that it's happening. Right. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is so I don't hog up the time, is that
you're fine.
You're fine.
Right. Is that if we really do believe in gentrification, not usurping or taking away the cultural dynamics of a community, your local city council, your city government, your county government, local municipality, state government, and your federal government will actually provide either zoning laws, or they will create actual laws that will help with affordable housing. We are providing $63 million TIFs, and TIFs are incrementing financing for basically developers to come in, they build luxury condos, they come in, they build them. And then what ends up happening is that we have these kind of, very watered down type of affordable housing zoning things. And so in the city of Atlanta, I was reading today about a project that's happening where and no one has experienced gentrification like the city of Atlanta. Places that were absolutely just off the chart, just nowhere, you couldn't find nobody outside that was African American. They are being gentrified at this very point. And what we see is that the city government is trying to institute zoning laws that will help provide affordable housing for those persons that are in those communities, if they want to own, right? So we have options to be able to make quote-unquote gentrification something that is plausible, right? But we have to be able to help and develop advocacy in those communities so that they are aware of what's going on. Right. And the only way that we do that is, and what we've seen is that we can't put that all in the hands of the developer. We absolutely have to have advocates who speak up and make sure that when we provide, mind you, tax dollars to developers to come in and build, that there are absolutely parameters around that so that they are not just building without accountability.
So I 100% agree with that. I think that the beauty of developing in the United States is that no matter what zoning in any community, if people want to be there, if the economics drive you there, the developer will adjust. So I don't take much credence in a lot of developers is like, oh, if you pass that law, then nobody's going to develop. If you pass that law, nobody's going to develop. Everything they've ever passed, raise property taxes, height limits, zoning processes. Like once the economics become advantageous enough, then they will adjust accordingly. DC went from basically doing city deals with no affordables in it, then 10%, then 20%. Now they're up to 30%, and the developers just keep on trucking. So it's definitely not, this is the end and this is the tipping point. If you do this, then, blah, blah, blah. What I have seen not, and I would love to get Mr. James's feedback on this, not be as successful is protecting cultural and retail facilities. Because I just don't think that most institutions have kind of figured that out. I think most institutions, if they really sit back and look at the whole landscape, all of them, whether you're Atlanta, Columbus, Jacksonville, Macon, Georgia, you should be implementing right now affordable housing, parameters in order to make sure that this thing is a little bit more even. But I think even institutions with, I would say, the best of intentions have struggled with providing that ability to keep the cultural there. Because in some of these instances, like, so imagine parts of DC, large swaths of DC. I think there was a study, large swaths of DC are now developed, were originally owned by, most of it was owned by the city. Secondly, it was owned by nonprofits, and third, it was owned by churches, right? So all that stuff has been redeveloped, but none of those institutions took heart to say, I'm in the driver's seat here. I can tell these people what they need to do, right? And then sort of in the later half, to Ms. Marvin's point, they started implementing these affordable housing parameters, and now they're starting to institute these cultural or retail parameters, and developers just come back and say, yeah, I can't find a local business. Oh yeah, I can't, whatever it is, right? And I'm not, like I said, I'm not casting dispersions. Maybe they can't find them in their network. Maybe I don't know. Maybe, these businesses need some more support from the city, but it's really hard to be like, 20% of your retail needs to be reserved for local businesses with less than 2 locations. Like DC does stuff like that. And then people just come back 5 years later, like, yeah, it's still empty. Can I put like a CVS there? And they're like, yeah, sure. And
Right.
like I said, that thing I think it still hasn't been figured out. I think the other piece of what cities do, I keep going back to institutions, because I think a lot of institutions feel powerless, and particularly given that I worship at a Black Baptist church, and a lot of the churches feel powerless. The neighborhood is closing in around them, and they don't realize the power that they still have, and making politicians recognize the power of those collective institutions is important. Because what happens is, now you're a Black church surrounded by people that are not from Washington, D.C., no matter what color they are, right? And all of a sudden, the politicians are listening to them more than this church that's been there for 50 years. And that just doesn't make any sense to me. So somehow trying to figure out how to collectively, push that agenda, because I think they just feel like, you said it earlier, Marvin, they just take these people for granted. They're like, oh, a lot of these cities are run by African Americans. They're gonna always vote for me. They're gonna always vote for me. Well, maybe not. Whereas they feel like they have to convince the newcomer to vote for me. Look, I'm pro development. I'm pro whatever. And the old people, they don't have any choice. They're gonna always vote for me, or they won't vote at all. I've even heard politicians say that, they won't vote at all. So I don't really care what they think. So that would be my 2 cents, just to augment what Marvin said, because I think it was eloquently said.
James, do you have any feedback, Mr. James?
Yeah, no, I mean, there to directly answer your question, of course, is that oftentimes, of course, and this is just bluntly speaking about the term of modern term of gentrification, right, which is whitewashing.
Right.
And because of that, the belief that gentrification is equated to whitewashing communities, specifically minority communities,
Mm-hmm.
that there can be no balance between the fact that you have persons who want what you have in geographical location, plus the cultural happenings within your community.
Right.
And so it really is about when gentrification is or about to happen, really about actually investing in those communities before, during, and after you decide to build.
Mm-hmm.
As much as we like to create this to be like this is a rocket science type of ordeal, it really isn't.
Right.
The heartbeat of this conversation will always be the fact that there is a lack of development in our urban communities. Mm-hmm. Now, let me be very clear. Gentrification is absolutely happening, but it's not happening at the rate that people actually, that as my Democratic counterparts would love to say. It's absolutely happening in major areas, but I can assure you that
it's not happening, man.
Is not happening in the Delta, Mississippi,
yep.
Right? It's not. But that's why that's so important to that conversation. Just as much as they like to leave that out, it's just as important. Which is that if this is so important to you to have the option to build, create, do. We're not saying that we don't want those things. We absolutely want to have a Whole Foods in our community. Mm-hmm. We absolutely want to have Chick-fil-A in our community. Mm-hmm. We absolutely want to have all of the institutions that are normally associated, right, with quote unquote suburban or industrial, certain economic class status, mm-hmm. right? We want those things. However, there has to be investment inside those communities before it happens. It's just, there's no way that you can work around that, right? There are businesses that you can talk to. Of course, you're from DC, I'm from Baltimore, you're from Philly, Janelle, that literally will tell you and will provide you with stories about how they felt like, of course, as business people, gentrification was going to be great for them.
Right.
We're going to have people who could afford services, right? More people that could afford services. There were more people that were coming into the neighborhood that absolutely they would benefit from it. But what was absent from that conversation was the fact that culturally, the people that supported you, right, were those persons who you probably did not value at the same level that you were going to value someone of a certain, taste status.
Right.
And it really does come from not marginalizing these type of communities or creating an economic, stagnant atmosphere so that they can actually build and be great. That's what really all of that lends to. So I think to really believe that I don't want developer A or developer B, I work in politics. I mean, like, I know all of the developers in this,
right.
all going to come, they're all going to talk to us. We know these things, but it's really about providing that economic opportunity on the front end so that people who are working 40, 50, 60 hours, working 2 jobs, they can't come to your local community meeting. They just can't. They don't know what's going on. So it's like why weren't you at the local community meeting to know what's going on? Well, it's because they make $7.75 at McDonald's, and then they got to go to their second night audit job at the local Marriott where maybe they might make $9 an hour, right? And by the time they get home, they're tired. They don't know what happened at the local community meeting, right? So that's why when we have this conversation about gentrification, I'm so inept about providing those dynamics, but because they're absent from the conversation.
Right.
That's why this is happening. This is not rocket science. This is really A plus B equals C.
This is good. It's been almost an hour, and I said I wasn't going to go past an hour. One thing I wanted to put out there, because there's a few people who have been watching. I know the numbers just dropped because it's getting later. But one person I wanted to put out there was this young man by the name of Greg Parker, and he's in Philadelphia, and he's also working in Cleveland. Doesn't live in Philly anymore, but he literally flies home to do expo type summits, one-on-one teaching about how to fix up own property, go back and buy your grandma's house that maybe you grew up in, go back and to buy certain properties in certain areas that have not yet been gentrified. It's literally a development that he has started and he's gotten other people to get on. And to be honest, James Judah Rogers actually told me about him. He was like, he did this mega summit downtown Philadelphia and asked all of these Black people, if you want to register, if you want to learn how to own property, if you wanted to do blah, 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 blah. And so he's one of the few people that I know at this very moment who's trying to beat the people to it. Because North Philly is the next spot. West Philly and North Philly and Philadelphia are the next two spots. Mm-hmm. West Philly is already starting to happen. My mother got a white neighbor who strums his guitar. And I was like, okay, this is different. We weren't used to that. The person who lived there before them was a Muslim. So an African-American Muslim, to be exact. So the dynamic of learning that made me more aware quickly. And so when I learned of people like him who are doing things specifically to draw younger people who are interested in to maintaining the cultural part, they want the change, but they want to be present in the change. And because, like you said, they can't make the community meetings, it's like now you have to, if you want to be a part of it, or if you want to have any say-so in it, I feel like the activist in you has to come up just a little bit. Find a way to make it work into your schedule. I am a person that worked 2 jobs, and I still was texting and hitting up people. Mahari Yard is another guy in Philadelphia, literally building up facilities and building up properties before, because they had not come yet into 52nd Street. They're migrating their way back slowly. And so University of Penn is there, Drexel University is there, just like Johns Hopkins. There are areas that draw Caucasians that now are taking over. They've redeveloped and now they're drawing a new area. And so of people, and so they haven't reached 52nd Street just yet. There is one property that's being redone currently. So anybody who's listening, you may have to be the person who becomes a little bit of an advocate and take the time to do it yourself. It may take some research. It may take some calls. It may take some Googles. It may take some emails. Do what you need to do. And what I did was on purpose start reaching out to people who were doing things in Philadelphia, who I know are doing things before it hits heavily, because it's about to happen. Mm-hmm. And I can speak for Philly because I watch out for my city. I know I moved because of my own personal reasons, but I watch out for my city. And I was like, y'all need to pay attention. Mahari Yar is another person. Both of these young men you can find on Instagram or Facebook who are doing things in the community, and they're trying to build it up before somebody comes and buys out their property. They're literally building up houses that have been vacant, selling them back to our community, making it available for us. As we're closing, if you have any last minute pieces you would like to share, anything, takeaways that you think those who are viewing or going to, the show will be on SoundCloud and it'll be available on YouTube. Anything that you think anybody needs to learn and taking away and moving from this. I thank you both for being a part of this episode and for sharing information that we all need to know about.
I think as you just hit on and Marvin hit on, I do think it's important that our communities guard themselves, not in like I said, an aggressive or what do I say, sort of xenophobic way, right? But in a way in which they are getting resources for their institutions, for their cultural institutions, for their religious institutions, for their schools, all of that stuff prior to the gentrification, because the stronger the community is that they come into, and I've seen this in my own experience, the stronger the community that the developer comes into, the more they say they ultimately have. So even if, so going to your point, Marvin, I've developed in communities where they didn't have like a community, group or anything like that. But in some communities they had them and they were very strong. And like you said, like you come to the meeting, people work multiple jobs. There's not that many people here, but there's 7 people that have just dedicated their lives like, this is what I'm doing. So you don't know how many people they represent, but you like, as a developer, I'm gonna sit down with these 7 people because I don't know what's gonna happen, right? So and they had development communities and they got themselves organized so that those people, and most of those people are usually kind of to what you said, Marvin. A lot of these communities are more diverse than we give them credit for. So you have the elderly that will be a part, and you have the business professional, you have the small business owner. Those tend to be the folks that are out front. But they are able, because most of the time they grow up in the neighborhood, they know sister such and such, they're able to get the opinions and say, this is what we want. And that, I just found that to be the most effective way. And then, like you said, like my neighborhood is an instance where there was, I think gentrification. I wanted to comment on what Marvin said about gentrification, ownership versus rental. A lot of the neighborhoods sort of in the center city, DuPont Circle, Logan Circle, those were high rental neighborhoods.
Right.
As it's moved closer to Columbia Heights, Petworth, Brookland, all that, those end up being high ownership African American. And you see the type of gentrification you see there is very different, right? It's still happening, but it's a lot of families deciding, okay, we'll rent our basement. And so you'll see, hey, there's a African American family above, and they're white people below. Or they move out the house altogether and they rent them to white people, but the ownership is still there. And when it comes time to vote, the politicians are listening to the owners, right? so it's like a dynamic, and I wish we could get out ahead of that. But to Marvin's point, Wells Fargo and Bank of America and all those other institutions already messed that up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. It has not stopped, right? So people always say, oh, redlining is 1960, 1970. No, it's not. It's just different now. But they've already put that groundwork. For those that do own, need to think about their options in a real way, kind of what you were saying, to say, I can rent this, I can fix this up. I know it's hard. I'm just not going to take the 400K and keep it moving, because I can make a generational shift for my family by renting this out or whatever. So just wanted to say that as a closing.
The New York Times did an article about a year ago on some African American families who were high net worth individuals, but made a conscious decision to live in urban centers that would be considered the opposite of where those certain net worth individuals would actually live.
Mm-hmm.
The reality of gentrification happening today is that, of course, going back to my earlier point, which is that regardless of where you live, regardless of how much you make, is that there absolutely has to be an inherent conversation about owning versus renting. There is, of course, the foundation of gentrification. It will always be whether or not we're actually providing economic development
Mm-hmm.
when it happens. But of course, we live in a reality, not utopian society. Therefore, the best thing that we can really do is talk about owning versus renting. And of course, people of color have so many barriers of entry into ownership. However, though, we in ourselves and minorities across the board have to make a very conscious decision about the fact that even as we ascend, right, with education, even as we ascend into new tax brackets, that about whether or not we're going to make a conscious decision and make a sacrifice, right, to live in these areas, because people need to see, right, the fact that young boys and young girls need to be able to see, right, the realtor that does well, the lawyer that does well, the doctor that does well.
Mm-hmm.
It is very much a sacrifice. I would love to live in the county of Baltimore, right, in the metropolitan area, but I make a very conscious decision to live in the city because I know that as I walk down the street, right, that young boy or that young girl that could never or might not ever come in contact with someone that is a young professional that makes a certain amount of money, right, for whatever reason, that is one of the sacrifices that I make so that they could see that person, right? We have to do those and we have to make those decisions as young professionals, especially as young professionals and people of color on the front end, because it's important for them to see us. And so, you know, as we're navigating life and as we're figuring out things, and of course, that is easier said than done.
Right.
When you can make that decision, I ask and implore you to think about making that decision because you don't know that it is probably more important to the overall goal of creating a homogenous community and society
Right.
you actually think. And of course, I led with that story, and of course, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you, you know, how that story ends, right? Which is that, of course.
Hold on, one more. You said go. No, you said I led with that story. It froze. So go ahead. I led with that story.
I'd be remiss if I didn't end with right just the premise of the article, right, which was that, of course, there were a lot of sacrifices that the people made. Right, they had to send their kids to private school because they wasn't sending them to the local public schools. Right, and they had to absolutely drive further to go to the local grocery store because they were in a food desert. Right. However, though, the ability for them to be in that community created and was the catalyst for things to happen that they weren't even aware of. They didn't know that because they were there, that they were going to be the voice for the local people of color. And that
exactly.
Yeah. Right. They didn't know that because they had their ability to control their schedule and they don't have to work a 7 to 3 and then a 3 to 11, and then maybe a part-time shift of doing Uber and Lyft. Right. If they got a car, that they had the ability to be able to speak up for the person that wasn't the singer on the block who was not getting their trash picked up. Right? You are the impetus, right, for change to actually happen in your society. So as much as I love to put gentrification on everybody else, I am very much a believer that we do have the ability to create change. We just have to make this thing called sacrifice. And so I'll leave you there.
All right. Well, I am closing the show on this evening. We went over our hour, but this has been a great, enjoyable conversation. I hope both of you guys have enjoyed being a part.
I have.
Thank you so much for it.
Thank you.
And now is one of you can decide who's going to pray. And then once the episode, of course, is available on SoundCloud, other people will be able to see the full effect. Well, we'll hear the full effect. It'll be on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Player FM alike. So, anybody want to share in prayer?
I can do it. So if you both could bow your heads in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for just bringing us here together virtually, Lord. We know that you are the repairer of all breaches, as Isaiah says. And we know that you have a plan for all of us. Lord, thank you for the wisdom that was shared at this talk. And thank you for just making this fellowship of like-minded people that come from different directions. And you have made it such that we are here together. Hopefully that someone can get a word from us such that they can be inspired to do what is best in their community and do something different than they've done the day before. Or just to re-energize someone who's been working so hard in their community to do the right thing. Further, I want to bless you to bless Mr. James and Elaine Janelle for what they do, and who they are and who you've uniquely created them to be. For we know that you have a great work in store for each of them. As they talk, I just see the wisdom that you begin to employ upon them. And we ask that your word go forth from them, so that they can continue to change lives here on earth and upbuild your kingdom. Lord, finally, I ask for safety across everyone who listens to this, and their families, and health and prosperity. For you know your plans are greater than we could ever imagine. These blessings I ask in your name. Amen.